Right, welcome back. Today our topic is going to be on holy orders in general, but in priesthood in specific, I guess, is more accurate to focus. If you'd like to get some nice supplementary material on this, Lord of Spirits recently on their podcast did a episode called World of Priestcraft, which was actually really good. If I had the wherewithal, I would have summarized it and added it into this presentation today, but I haven't had time because I've been out of town, as you know. But we'll cover a little bit of it. But one of the things, before we even get to this, that I want to reference from that is that they make the very good and accurate foundational point that priesthood is not something that is a specialized thing for only a few people in humanity. It is actually a fundamentally human activity, which goes back to Adam and Eve. That in the garden, Adam and Eve had a priestly role in their relationship to creation. And so that's the good point at actually which to start our talk about this. But when I put this together, I went back and looked a little more literally, I guess, and said, where does the first priest, the term, actually appear in the Bible? And of course, that's this figure here. Can anybody tell me who that first priest was? Melchizedek, correct. So in Genesis chapter 14, read, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest or Kohen of God Most High. And he blessed Abram and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. So it's very kind of interesting, enigmatic figure in the Old Testament. As Hebrews will say, he's without father or mother. He doesn't seem to have any lineage. That's not to say that literally he was a figure without father or mother, though there has been actually in time history, certain groups actually tried to teach that Melchizedek was a manifestation of the angel of the Lord, for example. And but that's not a mainstream view. This passage, as well as Psalm 110, which references Melchizedek, are the main references to this figure in the Old Testament and play a part in their use in the New Testament, as we'll see. Psalm 110, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord extends your mighty scepter from Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people shall be willing on your day of battle, arrayed in holy splendor from the womb of the dawn. To you belongs the dew of your youth. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Another very enigmatic psalm, which is interpreted in Hebrews as a reference to the Messiah. The Lord said to my Lord, and in fact, the Lord himself references this when they ask him, how can the Messiah be the son of David? If David says in the Spirit, the Lord said to my Lord, right? So that's one of these references. And so the Messiah here that's being referenced is also described as a priest forever according to the order or likeness or type of Melchizedek, not in the order of Melchizedek, as if there was a Melchizedekian order of priests. That's not what that means. But according to the type, form, that type of order. So I recently asked this to the Lord of Spirits Facebook group, which is called the Divine Council appropriately. I said, what do you guys think about this idea, which is found in rabbinical tradition, that Melchizedek is Shem? And I'm still kind of fond of the idea, or at least the adjacent idea, that he's somehow related to Shem, because for a number of reasons, it doesn't make sense to me that he could be kind of any other person, this Melchizedek, because why would Abram of God Most High be giving sacrifices to a pagan priest? That doesn't make sense. And the term Melchizedek is understood also as a title. It means Lord of Righteousness or King of Righteousness. So it's a typological image. And of course, Noah is really actually kind of a priest as well, because he is the first one to build an altar after the flood and offer sacrifices to God. And so Shem kind of makes sense that Shem would inherit that role. But one of the reasons why the rabbinical tradition pushed Shem and Melchizedek as an identity was they were trying to diminish the theology in St. Paul about Christ is like Melchizedek because his priesthood is not according to lineage. But it's not that big of an issue, because the point of Hebrews is not to say that Christ has no father or mother. Clearly he does. But that his priesthood doesn't depend on his lineage, because he's of the line of Judah, not the line of Aaron. The lineage priesthood issue is a later issue. So that's a really in the weeds kind of problem, but I just like to share it for those who are interested. Welcome, welcome. Okay, so this is where we get into some of this in Hebrews that I've been mentioning, Hebrews chapter 8. This is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest, Christ, who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord erected and not man. This is a very important issue. Both on that subject of the Paradise class we did on Wednesday night, but also related to this, the other Lord of Spirits podcast that just came out was called The Pattern of the Tabernacle, which also talked about, which connects to a lot of this, as we'll see. For every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. Therefore, it is necessary that this one also have something to offer, that Christ has something to offer. For if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, since there are priests who offer the gifts according to the law, who serve the copy and shadow of the heavenly things, as Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle. For he said, Christ said, the Lord, speaking to Moses as the angel of the Lord, and so forth, see that you make all things according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. So the priesthood of Aaron is a copy and a shadow of the heavenly priesthood and tabernacle and altar and so forth, which is Christ's priesthood in the heavens. So this is an important point of understanding the relationship of typology to fulfillment. But now he has obtained a more excellent ministry, inasmuch as he is also a mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises. So the new covenant supersedes, fulfills, and is more excellent than the old covenant. And so the priesthood of necessity also undergoes a change. St. Peter, not surprisingly, in his Catholic epistle, has a lot to say about the priesthood of the church, and uses this term of the royal priesthood and the holy nation a couple times, which is really important. Coming to him as a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious, you also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood. So you're both, this is kind of similar to this weird stuff we were talking about on Wednesday night. You know, you're both the garden and the fountain and so forth. When you become a follower of Christ, you become all these things. Likewise, Peter's using the same ideas. You become a stone, which is part of the house. You become the house yourself, and you also become the one who serves in the house of the Lord. So you're becoming all part of those things. And you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, and so forth. The point here being that for Orthodox Christians, we understand priesthood is not as a specific calling only for a few people primarily, but actually the calling of all Christians, with a secondary calling to the priesthood and the altar to serve the liturgy and the sacraments as a specific manifestation of that primary calling. Does that make sense? You are all, when you become Orthodox, so because some people say, why do you need priests? We don't need priests anymore, blah, blah, blah. We say, well, actually, we're all priests. We are all participating in the priesthood of Christ as Christians. But some of us, preside at the celebration of the sacraments, because we're set apart for that purpose and that role. And that's not necessarily that different from the Old Testament idea either. Even though the Levites were set aside for the specific ministry of the tabernacle and, of course, later the temple, it was still understood that the entire people of Israel were a holy nation and a royal priesthood. So this is not a new idea. It's just a continuation of the old. But when we talk about ordination here in holy orders, I just want to make it very clear that this is what you learn about priesthood from this is not just about guys in black. It's actually about what it means to be a Christian as a whole, because the pattern is the same. It's just one kind of manifestation. Just like we could say with marriage or monasticism are two examples of how to fulfill that calling, but not the only ones. In Malachi, we read, "From the rising of the sun even to its going down, my name shall be great among the Gentiles. In every place incense shall be offered to my name, a pure offering. For my name shall be great among the nations, says the Lord of hosts." So, for one, this is something we actually sing when the bishop enters the church. At least in the Slavic tradition, that's the hymn. I don't know if it's in Byzantine as well, but you'll hear this sung sometimes when the bishop first enters the church. But this priesthood that we participate in is this priesthood that glorifies God across all the nations, offering incense, offering pure offerings in every place in his name. Just like we've said in the other sacraments, priesthood, Christ is the main officiant of the sacrament of ordination. He's also the main officiant of everything that the priest does. So whatever a priest is doing, he's actually participating in the priesthood of Christ. And here's a beautiful icon of the Holy Eucharist, which depicts Christ in the vestments of a bishop. This is, of course, a bishop from a post fall of Constantinople period when the bishops started wearing the imperial robes of the sakos and the crown. But nonetheless, he's designated here as the bishop who is offering the Eucharist to his disciples in the Holy Liturgy. So he is both the priest and the victim. We have a prayer in the Divine Liturgy called I don't know what it's called. I call it the prayer before the great entrance, which is what I say while the choir is singing the cherubic hymn. And in that prayer, there's a line that says, you are he who offers and he who is offered, he who receives and he who is received. So he's the offerer, the receiver, and the one that's being received. He's the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Christ's priesthood is passed along not by tribe, not by lineage, but by the grace of the Spirit in holy ordination. And the church's priesthood participates by grace in the one eternal priesthood of Christ. So the exercise of the church's priesthood is inseparable from Christ himself. There's nothing special about Father David Subu or any other priest. We're just guys, just dudes. We got pulled off and said, hey, I want you to do this job. But Christ is the one who is the true celebrant of all the mysteries that we are participating in. In the church from ancient times, we see that there are actually several orders of priesthood in general, or ordination. There were the minor orders from early on. These included taper bearers and altar servers, readers and subdeacons. So taper bearer or candle bearer or lamp lighter, you might see that term as well. Even this was a job that, because it involved serving in the temple, in the place of worship, involved a blessing to do that. Altar servers or acolytes, subdeacons and acolytes in the ancient world were pretty much identical. Acolyte now generally means like altar server, but in the ancient church, an acolyte in the West or a subdeacon in the East is actually it's almost an ordained position because you have responsibilities. You can serve, move things on the altar, move holy vessels and things like that, which others can't do. Readers, and these are kind of in order here. So you'd have to pass through these to become a reader, to become a subdeacon, etc. Reader has a blessing, and subdeacon has a blessing, which are kind of like, I think subdeacon is like a tonsuring, we call it, or a reader is a tonsuring. I'm sorry, I don't even remember now from my own days, but it's a service in and of itself, which is separate from the liturgy. Whereas the major orders of priesthood, deacon, priest, and bishop, the ordination services are all done in the context of a divine liturgy. They're not done separately. So to make a reader, it would be before the liturgy, or subdeacon would be before the liturgy. You'd have them approach the bishop. He would say the prayer and say, bless you to become this. In the major orders, there's this sacramental laying on of hands for the specific orders. And what's kind of interesting is where you do it in the liturgy, because that defines what the role is that person has. So it's actually in reverse order in terms of what point in the liturgy. So the first stage is deacon. You're not ordained in the divine liturgy. That part is inserted until after the consecration of the Eucharist. Why?
Because you can't consecrate the Eucharist yourself.
The deacon doesn't consecrate a Eucharist. So the deacon distributes the Eucharist, but he can't consecrate the Eucharist. So the deacon is ordained. They interrupt the liturgy to ordain a deacon between those two parts. Likewise, for the priest's job is to consecrate the Eucharist. So the priest is ordained before the consecration of the gifts, but after the preaching of the gospel. We say, well, the priest preaches the gospel. Yeah, but you also might notice, you might hear this prayer in the liturgy where we pray for our bishops. And one of the things we say, that God grant them many years to rightly divide the word of the truth. I like that they've kept, in the new edition, they've brought, used to be like define the word of the truth and kind of like the mid version, but they went back to the old language, which literally says divide. And that was because, of course, in ancient Greek, it wasn't like English. You had to actually kind of put in the punctuation and figure out where it was going to, there was no, and also in the ancient church, remember, there was no chapter and verse. So bishops' jobs, amongst other things, was to establish, you read from this part to this part, this word to this word. And they literally divided the word of the truth and established the lectionary. Now, over time, the lectionary became fixed. But one of the earliest things that bishops did was say, this is what you're doing this week. And their primary job, of course, as bishops, as heirs of the apostles, is the preaching of the word. That's their highest function, so to speak. So the bishop is or consecrated, but ordained to be a bishop before the reading of the gospel. So basically at the very kind of close to the beginning of the entire liturgy. And that's why you see it at the different points. The consecration of a bishop is a much bigger thing, but the priest and the deacon's ordinations are pretty much the same service with very slight differences. We'll take a look at that as we go. So Christ is all of those things, by the way. Christ he is the bringer of light. He is the reader of the scriptures in the synagogue. He is the one who can, move the holy things, right? He is a servant who comes among you as one who serves. He is a priest who offers himself for the life of the world. And of course, he's the bishop, the overseer of our faith. So he's all those things. He is also the choir leader. He is the deacon of all. He's the reader, the preacher. He serves at the altar. He's the chief shepherd and overseer of our souls, as I said. Every participant in the services of the church shares in Christ's ministry in the church, and Christ co-ministers with each one of us to accomplish his works in his kingdom. So it's a team effort with a very clear captain, if you will. So ordination is the foundation of the gospel economy. What do I mean by that? I don't mean economy in the sense of the financial aspects of the church. I mean the dispensation, how it works itself out in the world, how God manages his household here on earth. So, and all of the other mysteries depend on that ordination. And that, of course, comes through the apostles. Christ sends out the apostles. That's what an apostle means. Peace be unto you. As the Father has sent me, I also send you. And the first thing he gives them is he breathes on them and says to them, receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. So he gives them that very special blessing for forgiveness that we looked at last week, or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was that we met last. Apostolic succession is something, obviously, which is claimed by more than the Orthodox Church. So what is the Orthodox understanding of what does apostolic succession mean? The apostles were the unique bearers of the Holy Spirit, peace possessors, right? Communicators of the forgiveness of sins. They had this grace given to them. They themselves, through ordination by the laying on of hands, made bishops, priests, and deacons wherever they were sent. Okay, so they appointed elders or presbyters, which later the word becomes priest in English. They prayed with fasting, commending them to the Lord, in whom they had also believed. You can read about the making of bishops and deacons, particularly in 1 Timothy. The unique prerogatives of bishops are to ordain and to hear accusations against priests, which is something we don't normally like to think about or talk about, but it does happen. Do not receive an accusation against an elder or a presbyter except from 2 or 3 witnesses, 1 Timothy. So the bishops, one of their responsibilities is what do you do when a cleric has been accused of misbehavior of any sort? Could be heresy, could be financial misconduct, could be sexual misconduct, just could be some canonical misconduct. Okay, that happens too. Say a priest decides he's going to go preach in some other village where he's not assigned and draw sheep away. I mean, that actually happens, even in the world today. So the bishop's job is to maintain that. And that's why bishops are the ones who establish canons, rules and guidelines for the church. When bishops fail in this unique prerogative to, first of all, ordain the right people, and 2, to discipline people when they do go wrong, obviously a lot of damage ensues, as we've seen in the last century, 50 years in particular. What's that? What happened in the last 50 years? The sexual misconduct that came to light in many churches. But not just them. All churches. I think that was the most pronounced, and obviously the one that got the most media. But pretty much every church is now aware that they can't just say, "Oh, they're a pastor. Of course they're okay." There was kind of a willful ignorance, which once it became willful negligence, landed them in a lot of legal trouble. Right? So there were accusations in the Orthodox Church. Oh, sure. There's Orthodox priests who have misconduct. There are Orthodox bishops who have misconduct. Yes. Which is a different. Thank you for asking that, by the way. That's why those canons are there. If you look at the early canons, especially from the ecumenical councils and so forth, a lot of them deal with how to defrock, or what a priest can be defrocked for, or what a cleric can be defrocked for. And for some reason, which I don't understand, there seemed to be a mentality, at least in the Roman Church, that once a person was ordained, they were ordained forever, like marriage is forever. And so as a result, they wouldn't defrock people that were found in malfeasance. They would just move them around, or they would retire them. But that is completely against the ancient canons. The ancient canons are very clear. You do something like that, you're not a priest anymore. It is not a grace that can be given to you forever, regardless of what you do.
They do defrock priests in the Roman Church. It's just in that case.
Yeah, there was a problem, right? There was this mindset that somehow we can rehabilitate or something. I don't know.
Would you say, if you can't say what to say, that there's ever been corruption at the bishop level or above?
Oh yeah, we know that. I mean, it's public record. I mean, it's on the news right now. You just look at a certain patriarch of a certain country who's going along with what his president is doing, and you will see it in your face. And the rest of the Orthodox world is notably outraged because of that, because it's just not acceptable behavior. But no, the fact is when there's diligence and there's no reason to be shocked or scandalized by what I'm saying, because it's actually right there in the book of Acts. There was scandalous behavior amongst clerics, even in the time of the apostles. And the whole history of the church tells you all kinds of these stories. It's not like this is something unusual. And the lesson we need to take from it is, do not deify the priesthood or the clerics. We are, I mean, I have to say this. I once was at an event, and there was a priest there who was under investigation. And another priest said, do you think that this can happen? He asked a group of us, do you think this can happen, that priests can fall and be tempted and things like that? And I said, of course we can. It's a historic fact, and if we don't maintain a vigilance, we can fall into sin. There's nothing scandalous about it. The other person, who happened to be under investigation for misconduct, said, "Oh no, we're protected by a special grace to the priesthood." It's not serving priest anymore.
The hierarchy goes deacon, priest, bishop, metropolitan?
Bishops have their own system of ranking within themselves. That's a great question. All bishops are pares. They're all equal, right? Prima inter pares is the language of the ecumenical councils. All bishops are effectively equal, but some have more responsibilities over broader areas. So, for example, in any regional church, say the Church of Greece or the Church of Romania or something like that, you'll have your bishop of your local diocese. That bishop might have other bishops under him, in which case he'll probably be called an archbishop, or he might be called a metropolitan. For example, I think in Romania, like the metropolitan of Iași is a big diocese, and he has many bishops and dioceses probably under him, so to speak. And very often that metropolitan is elected to become the patriarch. Historically, there's a patriarch of Romania, so that's the bishop of the whole country. All the diocese, so he's the president of the Holy Synod, the assembly of bishops, and each bishop has their own diocese. Okay, so in bigger churches, it might even be something where there's archbishops, and then they have bishops under them that are auxiliaries or assistant bishops or whatever like that. So, and you'll see slightly different variations of that from country to country or diocese to diocese even.
But an archbishop and metropolitan are the same?
They're both bishops. So a metropolitan might refer to simply a bishop or an archbishop of a large city, which is where you get the term metropolitan, okay? In the United States, for example, I think all the Greek archbishops were made metropolitans a few years ago. They were elevated to that status to make them sound, I guess, more important. In the Orthodox Church in America, which is our jurisdiction, there's only one metropolitan. He's the Metropolitan Archbishop of Washington, Metropolitan of all America. And all the other bishops are either bishops or archbishops, and they have one diocese each. And he has his diocese, which is Washington, but he's also metropolitan over the whole country as the Holy Synod.
So I thought the patriarch was over the whole country.
So we don't have a patriarch in this country. Not every regional church that is self-headed has a head. That's why it's called autocephalous or self-headed. For example, I think the Church of Greece or Albania, for example, is an archbishop. Archbishop of Tirana is the head of the Church of Albania. It's an autocephalous church. The Metropolitan of the OCA is an autocephalous church. The Patriarch of Romania or Russia or Jerusalem, those are autocephalous churches. So again, it's a title that isn't like a solid thing, like you're bigger or better because you have this name. It's just a title for that region.
So basically, if I hear you correctly, an archbishop, a metropolitan, and a patriarch are kind of all at the same level?
They're effectively the same thing, but they have specific jobs and positions within. So a patriarch in a country will have authority over his other bishops as the head of the synod. He might have metropolitans or archbishops under him. In the Orthodox Church in America, we don't have a patriarch, we have a metropolitan. He has bishops and archbishops under his authority in the Holy Synod. But again, they're all like the apostles, there's a conciliarity that they have to, even a patriarch has to be kind of answerable to his Holy Synod too. He's the president, but he's not the dictator.
So all of that was to ask the question, what do you do with a corrupt patriarch?
Yeah, so then when you have a corrupt patriarch, there has to be, it's obviously a very difficult thing to remove one, but it has happened. And in fact, it happens sadly just as often for ones that are not corrupt, because they're being pushed out by corrupt ones, right? So for example, Saint Athanasius, Archbishop of Alexandria, if you know his story, Athanasius contra mundum, he was against the world. So poor guy gets kicked out, brought back in, kicked out, brought back in during the whole Arian controversy. St. John Chrysostom, same thing, dies in exile. So being a bishop of the church is a path of martyrdom. Whenever I've had friends or priests that I know that were being taken up to be a bishop, I would always say, I'm very sorry. Everyone's congratulating them, but I would go up and say, I'm very sorry, because I knew what they were. That means you're being put in line for another level of martyrdom altogether. And being a bishop is truly a martyrdom. You have to die to yourself every day to do that job. It's extremely difficult. So, cool. Yeah. But all good questions. So shepherds of the church. Ordination involves consecration and sacramental and priestly perfection through the laying on of hands. So there is this is the act, if you will, that is the making of the bishop, the laying on of hands. In ordination, a layman becomes a cleric, one whose lot is the Lord, as St. Jerome says. A priest is no longer a member of the flock, but a shepherd, no longer a private or secular person, but a Catholic person. It's a funny way of putting it. Catholic, not in the sense of, I'm a Catholic, but Catholic in the sense that I belong now to more than myself. I belong to the fullness of the church, which means a priest has to obviously conduct himself in a different way. Even when I go on vacation, I'm still a priest. I still conduct myself. I don't wear a cassock when I'm on vacation, just to be sure. I have a really bright and obnoxious shirt that I bought for my Florida vacation last year with flamingos on it, because I don't get to wear that very often. But when I'm on vacation, I will wear something like that. But I'm still a priest. I still conduct myself, at least in my conduct towards other human beings, as a person who's answerable to the whole church, right? And I am. The priest is the president of the assembly, unless there's other priests there or a bishop there, in which case I take a back seat. Priests at a hierarchical liturgy when a bishop serves are wallflowers for the most part. If they're lucky, they get to do a couple petitions, but for the most part, they're just like everybody else attending liturgy that they don't really have a big job. The bishop does the heavy lifting, the deacons do their parts as usual, and the priests kind of sit back and maybe they get a couple prayers that they get to do if the bishop lets them. But otherwise, the priest is typically the president of the assembly. That's in the case of the liturgy. Obviously, I'm presiding at the altar and offering of the liturgy. At the annual assembly meeting, the priest is the president of the parish assembly in our diocese, and so forth. And the priest is God's ambassador and steward of God's mysteries. So we see that there are consequences of that, right? In Acts 5, with what's his name? Ananias and Sapphira, is that it? Who lie about their tithing. To lie to God's ambassador is to lie to God. To receive God's ambassador is to receive God. And to reject God's ambassador is to reject God. So we have an authority that is given to us, but that authority, like Spider-Man, that comes with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. So it's and as I think I said last time, before you think it's this exalted thing, remember that I'm essentially God's garbage man. I take out the garbage of people's sin, burn it in the fires of his love, and clean the house. Father George Florowski was a great priest of the last century, a great theologian who brought a lot of understanding into the English language for the Orthodox, and taught here in this country, talks about this. Pentecost becomes eternal in the Apostolic Succession. That is, in the uninterruptibility of hierarchical ordinations in which every part of the church is at every moment organically united with the primary source. It is precisely by this apostolic uninterruptibility of successive ordinations that the whole Church is bound into a unity of the body from a unity of the Spirit. And there is only one way and one approach, to draw near and to drink from the one spring of life once revealed. So, yeah, our church there's the priesthood of Christ has a lineage, but it's not by blood, it's by the Spirit, right? It's by his blood running through all of these liturgies throughout all of these centuries. And it's why when you have like a church that says, well, we want to become Orthodox, there's some steps. Sometimes whole communities want to become Orthodox, not just individuals. And some of them maybe have been doing things in an Orthodox way. They've been serving the liturgies according to the rubrics of the Orthodox Church. They've maybe even been ordaining people in the same way. But unless they have the connection to this uninterrupted sequence, they're not canonical, right? So to receive communities like that, and it has happened a few times, in this country in particular, there is a process of receiving all of those individuals in a canonical way. St. John Chrysostom, they separated them from the multitude. He does not tell in what way it was done, but that they were ordained with prayer. For this is the meaning of herotinia. That's the word we usually use from Greek for ordination, herotonia. The ordination, the hand of the man is laid upon the person, but the whole work is of God. And it is God's hand which touches the head of the one ordained, if he be duly ordained. So, in fact, that's what the prayer says. It's so beautiful. It's so grace-filled prayer. When a bishop ordains a priest, there's a particular prayer which says, Lord, by the grace of your Holy Spirit, fill all which is lacking. Which, of course, for those of us who are in the moment of being ordained, feels like pretty much everything. And we realize how much we depend on that grace going forward. St. Nikolai Velimirovich also taught in this country, died in this country. He died at St. Tikhon's monastery, up where I went to seminary. But he was a bishop of Žiča in Serbia, but it was kind of like in exile. By the laying on of their hands on those chosen from among the faithful, the apostles consecrated bishops, priests, and deacons. It is evident from this that the Christian faith is not merely dogma, but spiritual power. It is not enough merely to know. It's also necessary to possess spiritual power, authority. It is not enough merely to be chosen from among the people. One must be set apart by God. The laying on of hands signifies the handing on of authority and the descent of this power upon those who are chosen. So this is, by the way, a picture here of somebody having the hand being laid on them at the corner of the altar. And since the gifts are here and out in this form, I'm thinking that might be the ordination of a deacon, because it looks like everything's, if I'm not mistaken. So otherwise the gifts might be still covered at that point, I'm not sure. Okay, let's see. 1 Peter, St. Peter says, the elders or the priests who are among you, I exhort, I who am a fellow elder or priest, a presbyter, and witness of the sufferings of Christ, also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. So our priesthood, we are participating in some pretty amazing blessings. I mean, for as much hardship as we might endure as servants of the Lord, as much martyrdom as we might go through as servants of the Lord, the crown that awaits us at the end of that journey is so exceptional that it keeps us going, keeps us ticking and moving along towards the prize. In 1 Timothy, St. Paul says to his spiritual son, do not neglect the gift that is in you, which was given to you by prophecy with the laying on of the hands of the eldership, the priesthood. Meditate on these things. Give yourself entirely to them, that your progress may be evident to all. Take heed to yourself and to the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this you will save both yourself and those who hear you. So being true to the faith is very important. Taking heed to yourself and to the doctrine. Now, for some reason, I got a subscription to Christianity Today, which is a very evangelical magazine, and 90% of it I find to be not very useful for me. But there's an interesting article this month where they're saying you are not deconstructing, and they talk about deconstructing faith, and of course, deconstructionism is itself kind of a school of thinking. How do Orthodox people attend to the doctrine while still being able to use deconstruction, which is a very popular thing to do? I find it very useful because I'm continually having to go back and go, what are the foundations of the doctrine? Are they what I think they are? And the more I dig, I reconstruct the faith from the ground up again. From each layer by layer, I find deeper and deeper meaning. So that's part of taking heed to the doctrine. It doesn't mean just blindly saying, that's good, it's enough for me, he said it, and that's all I need to know. That's just being intellectually lazy, in my opinion. Forgive me if anybody's offended by that. But to me, I'm like, you should constantly try to learn what your faith is based on a deeper level. Some people are afraid to do that because they think they'll lose their faith. I'm not. I'm all in. I think the more I studied, and I study this more and more, and I push those places where I'm, think, oh, this might upset the apple cart, but it always sets me on an even straighter course than ever before. Saint Cyprian of Carthage talks about the unity of the church. Was a great proponent of it. He said the bond of the priests is the strength of the church. That's a beautiful image. I was just in Arizona for a week with my brother priests, and in Texas with another brother priest, and a lot of us mentioned how hard it is when we don't have the opportunity to be around other priests. In the ancient world, you lived pretty close to your other priests. You probably saw other priests once in a while at least. Maybe for major feast days or something like that. If you lived in a city, you certainly saw plenty, because pretty much everybody was of your church, or most of them were of your church, right? So nowadays, we're these isolated, atomized pockets across this vast North American continent, so it's much harder.
Do you have friendships with non-Orthodox clergy?
Non-Orthodox clergy, couple, not very many, once in a while. There are, and part of it is just time. Just getting together with other Orthodox priests is pretty challenging to find the time for it. So having the time to do that with even a broader circle would be a challenge.
Because the Orthodox frequently bow out of ecumenical.
Yes, right? Yes. We used to be very active because we used to have a lot of hope that this might be something that would be of a good use. The problem is that most of those ecumenical organizations have gone farther and farther into frank heresy, right? It used to be like the Episcopalian Church, for example. You could say 100 years ago, well, if there's no Orthodox Church and there's an Episcopal Church there, they, maybe go there because it's pretty close. They have a respect for this stuff. And I mean, now, no, I couldn't say that. It would be impossible. So it becomes harder and harder as time goes on. And that's not something we're happy about. We try to do what we can to be present. We have the priests I know, the clergy that I know that are usually not Orthodox, to steward the ecumenical events that I do actually get involved in. So this is again Saint Nikolai. This power is indeed that grace of God that strengthens a man, sanctifying and enlightening him. It is a divine grace, truly, which teaches and guides the flock of Christ, tending it and strengthening it through the mysteries. A priest is a vessel of the ineffable, fearsome, and all-sufficing power of grace. Blessed is the priest who understands how priceless is the treasury he has become. Blessed is he if the fear of God is with him day and night until his last breath. There is no greater honor or responsibility on this earth than the calling and service of a priest. By the laying on of the bishop's hands, he is brought into relationship with the eternal, celestial fount of grace and with the authority of the apostles. He therefore becomes, by grace, a friend and concelebrant of all other Orthodox priests, from apostolic times down to the present day, and their dignity adorns him. So we're like Rey Skywalker. We're all the Jedi. What? Oh, okay. God bless. This is my wife, by the way. She wanted to come and hear what I had to say about priesthood today. So if you want to find out about what does it mean to be a priest wife, she'll be happy to tell you, much to all of my embarrassments.
Is there some work group with these ones in the ones? Like a network group?
We try, except you think it's hard for clergy to get together. In order for them to get together, we're the ones that have to stay home with the kids. Or in many other cases, we are the ones who work full-time because we bring in the health insurance, extra, additional income, and we're busy. We're busy, but yeah, we would love nothing more than to get together.
It's a special calling of its own.
It's very challenging.
Yeah.
I suppose one beauty that came out of COVID, though, now that clergy wives in general are getting more comfortable with technology and Zoom and whatever, video conferencing, they are starting to connect more. And, we'll try to do Zoom online ministries and things, but yeah, it's a challenge. Very challenging. But I think a lot it's just kind of, we're just very guarded, I guess. So, many of us don't. We try to do retreats and stuff, but those have kind of fallen to the wayside since COVID. So I know some of them are starting to come back again. Hopefully next year I'll be able to find a clergy with retreat to attend.
Yeah. Thank you.
Key.
Oh, yeah, you do. Yes, I can. Based on what this passage from St. Nikolai, there's another passage, I don't think I have it in the slideshow, but St. John Chrysostom also talked about the priesthood. He said it's if you think about it, the priest has powers not even an emperor has, right? The power to retain and forgive sins. It's an exalted calling that no earthly power has. So, we'll talk about how St. John Chrysostom approached priesthood. In fact, one of the readings in the Catechism packet of primary sources, if you want to read one of the saints, is on the priesthood by St. John Chrysostom, where he talks about it, because it's a really great classic work and reveals a lot of the kind of the Orthodox mindset about what is priesthood all about. St. Ignatius, one of our apostolic fathers from the early 2nd century, had a very high ecclesiology. If you've taken my other courses, you've probably heard some of these passages before. In like manner, let everyone respect the deacons as they would respect Jesus Christ, just as they respect the bishop as a type of the Father, and the presbyters as the council of God and the college of the apostles. This is because typically the bishop was the presiding cleric, right? He had the deacons serving, doing all the running around, and the bishops, like you'll see this in a hierarchical liturgy with multiple priests, the priests are like the council on the sides, standing and so forth, like the college of the apostles. Without these, it cannot be called a church. That's what St. Ignatius thought in the early 2nd century. I'm confident that you accept this, for I have received the exemplar of your love and have it with me in the person of your bishop. His very demeanor is a great lesson, and his meekness is his strength. I believe that even the godless do respect him. So he's receiving a bishop from another territory, and he's writing to the Trallians and extolling them on the character of their bishop. And he might be doing that for a couple reasons. One, maybe they're giving this poor guy a lot of grief, and he's trying to guilt the Trallians into better behavior. Or he's literally saying, wow, your community must be really good because your bishop is actually really chill and not stressed out. So it could be that too. But I suspect that there's a subtext here that has that, because based on what I've seen throughout my life as in the priesthood, there's more to that than what you see. Here is my beloved former Metropolitan Herman, who was the rector of the seminary when I was there, and this is in fact the seminary chapel, and this is him ordaining. I'm not sure who that. I should know who that is, but this was how I saw many ordinations from up here, actually, in the choir when I was singing. But this is him ordaining somebody at the corners of the altar. The mystery of ordination changes the one who is ordained. Not as much as we would like. Okay, when you're ordained, you don't become super pious and super holy. You have all the same idiosyncrasies and bad habits and problems that you ever had. But it does do something mystically, and I can't explain it, but it does help you become what you need to become, at least, as long as you don't mess it up too bad. Not all priests are pastors or parish priests, so to speak. Not all priests are going to serve in a communal setting. We have many priests who serve their priesthood entirely in a different way. Some are scholars, some are teaching somewhere maybe, some are hospital chaplains only, or military chaplains in particular. We have a whole host of Orthodox military chaplains. So there are many ways of being a priest. Some are only substitute priests sometimes. Some are just administrators and will spend most of their priesthood helping a bishop, being a secretary to a bishop or something like that. So that happens. And even priests who are pastors need sabbaticals and times to rest. That's why our Archbishop has us go on a week-long trip to Arizona in the winter every year, so we can get a little reprieve. St. Simeon, the new theologian, sensed God's grace entering his heart at the time of priesthood, and he talked a lot about when you come before the Holy Mysteries, being able to sense it, realize, see the uncreated light in the chalice when you approach, things like that. Very, very powerful. St. John Chrysostom, for transparent madness it is to despise so great a dignity, without which it is not possible to obtain either our own salvation or the good things which have been promised to us. For if no one can enter into the kingdom of heaven except he be regenerate through water and the Spirit, and he who does not eat the flesh of the Lord and drink his blood is excluded from eternal life. And if all these things are accomplished only by means of those holy hands, the hands of the priest, how will anyone without these be able to escape the fire of hell or to win those crowns which are reserved for the victorious?
He speaks of the holy hands.
Mm-hmm.
I do not understand why some priests have been very hesitant to allow me to honor them by kissing their hands.
That's a good question. Yeah. There's that's a lot of Romanian priests are like that. They will pull their hand away, and I know that they're trying to exemplify some humility in that by saying, "I'm not worthy for you to kiss my hand," right? But when I was a layperson, I loved kissing the hand of the priest and getting that blessing. And when I go to my bishop, I always love to get that blessing. So to me, it's not about, the humility is give people your hand and let them touch you.
Mm-hmm.
You're there to serve them. So I nobody asked me for my blessing because I'm a wretched, wicked man. So they know better than to ask me for a blessing. But I don't pull my hand away if they do, because I realize where it's coming from. It's not about me. They're not asking for David Subu's blessing, which is worthless. They're asking for the Lord's blessing, and that's not mine to withhold, right? And here's where he says about this: the priestly office is indeed discharged on earth, but it ranks among heavenly ordinances, and very naturally, for neither man nor angel nor archangel nor any other created power, but the Paraclete himself instituted this vocation, and persuaded men while still abiding in the flesh to represent the ministry of angels. This is the kind of ecclesiology of the early fathers and the early church. It's very beautiful, very, very mystical in understanding of the incredible grace of God that God shares with his church. And again, great responsibility comes with that. Now, you may ask, or may not ask, how does one become a priest? As Hebrews says, no man takes this honor to himself, but he who is called by God, just as Aaron was. And there is a certain quality of vocation. There's a joke that I heard years ago that said, in the days when few were called but many were chosen, meaning there are a lot of people that were ordained that probably shouldn't have been. And sometimes it goes the opposite way around, where it's like, few are chosen, even though there's plenty who are called because they have been bitten too bad in the past, so they're very careful. So like right now, the Synod of the OCA, to become a priest, to even become, I think, I don't know if it's for readers or subdeacons, but definitely for deacons and above, you have to go through like a psych evaluation. That's like a whole day, 2-day thing or something. Like, I never had to do that. I just had to go to confession and go to church, you know. And maybe they're wiser to do the psych evals now. I don't know. Well, I guess we'll see. Many saints of the church, actually, St. Gregory Theologian, St. John Chrysostom, St. Ambrose, St. Augustine, St. Martin, actually had a holy aversion to ordination. So, for example, St. John Chrysostom hid in a cave. That's what that icon is. Hid in a cave and prayed that God would take that cup away from him. He literally ran away. And some of these guys did exactly that. They actually ran away until they were basically either tricked or cajoled or physically manhandled and press-ganged into the church to be ordained. I mean, you actually have some histories of that, which is pretty fun. But that's how it should be. You know, you should, I mean, not for everyone, obviously, because you're there to be obedient, but there should be a part of you that says,
responsibility.
it's just, when you have this kind of ecclesiology, like, who am I? Who am I to dare to approach the holy altar? And I mean, it's an act of outrageous folly, either to the glory of God or to the shame of the church, I guess, one way or another. We'll find out, you know. To aspire to serve is not the same as an ambition for authority. My concern is always if I meet a priest who's for some reason gunning to be made a bishop, that's the last guy I want to see. That's a huge red flag. I'm like, yeah, no, it's not something you should be campaigning for. And the people who campaign them, frankly, I find them to be very questionable. And I'm concerned. But being someone who aspires to serve, that's the right attitude. We had a candidate for the episcopacy who said, "I'd be happy just pushing a broom in the Lord's house." I was like, that's the kind of person I want to see. No, he didn't. He ended up doing something else, but that's fine. He had the right mentality about it. He had the right attitude towards it. Here's some examples. 1 Peter. Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. But you might remember from the last class, there was that passage about the good spiritual father is one who is strict with himself, but gentle with his spiritual children. He doesn't use the canons as canons of the church and so forth. This is the same idea, right? Be loving, be a good example, don't wield force. Because you can say, you have to do it, I'm the priest. But it's kind of like, Game of Thrones. He who says he is a king has to say he is the king is no king, right? You shouldn't have to exert force.
Do the Orthodox have a Sunday obligation?
Obligation is not a word we like to use.
So it's not in the Catholic Church, it is a mortal sin not to go to Mass on Sunday or any other day of obligation. They're called days of obligation.
we don't.
So there's no such thing.
We don't intimidate people, no.
Are you able to withhold the Eucharist from someone that's
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Well, we put people under penance. I mean, that was kind of one of the things we kind of talked about. We didn't actually talk too much about penances, but we could. Sometimes people are under penance because they've done something or whatever, and but they're still actually part of the penance might be come to church. Prepare for communion and then not take it. That's a penance in itself, right? It's like realizing, fine-tuning yourself to what you've caused yourself to miss out on. But
is that penance because I know there are views of the Eucharist that it's medicinal.
Yes.
Instead of view that, you're going to stay away from the family table because you did this horrible thing.
No, it's not you're staying away from the family table. It's that this medicine is too strong. This medicine requires you don't always give the same medicine at the same time depending on the illness, right? So if somebody's been severely injured, you set the bone, you sew up the thing before you start pumping them full of some other medicine, right? So you have to fix the one thing before you can do the next thing. And so the penance is always thought of in terms of this medicinal therapeutic approach. What's actually going to get this person in the right direction? Saying it's okay, saying what you did was terrible, but go to communion anyway, might not be the right thing, especially if it's a habitual thing. Let's say somebody's in an illicit relationship with somebody and they haven't broken it off. I'm not going to say keep coming to communion while you keep sleeping around. I'm going to say sort it out with that person, make your decision, either make it a real thing and marry them and do the right thing, or cut it off and be done with it and do the right thing. But don't come into communion while you're doing that, because you've got to sort that. That's the injury, and it's perpetual, right? So that's, I think, it's never a punishment. A punishment is a lousy way of healing, Please, sir, may have another. It's like, no, it's.
Do the Orthodox accept that saying of eating and drinking condemnation on yourself?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit in the Eucharist class too, in Eucharistic discipline. So, good priests obey Christ rather than demanding obedience of themselves. Their authority from the Lord is to help people and is authority for edification, not for destruction. And this is true, but it's sometimes hard because sometimes you do have to kind of tell things how they have to be, right, as the priest. And that's always a difficult position. Bishops have the same problem. Bishops sometimes have to tell parishes, you can't do this way, or you have to do this, or your priest has to go here, or you have a new priest now, and sometimes they rebel. Whole communities rebel, and that's not a good thing. So you try to find ways to work it so that it goes down better with the honey, right? But like the last 2 years were a great example. I got obedience given to me from the powers on high, from my bishop, from the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it wasn't my job to say, well, if you feel like it, it's kind of like, no, this is what we have to do now. I'm under obedience too. You're going to be under obedience too if you come to be a part of this. And that was hard for some people. They didn't like that. As St. Nikon says, the spiritual father merely indicates the way. You yourself must follow the path. A lot of people love to have a holy spiritual father and then not do anything he says. That doesn't help. Qualifications for clergy. If you look at 1 Timothy and Titus 1, St. Paul focuses on the moral and spiritual values. Don't be given to too much wine, have a good household, be a good parent, be a good husband, that kind of stuff. Again, assuming that priesthood was for married men in general, not focusing on academic credentials. We do have academic credentialing within our churches, usually a Master of Divinity degree or an equivalent, but it's not required. There are priests who become priests through other means. Maybe they've come through serving in the church as a chanter for many years, and that's just, they learn everything about the services in and out. They learn the theology in and out, because if you ever heard our services, there's a lot of theology in them. They learn the church history and all that. So after many years, they might be ordained without having to go through as much. There's a deacon, a vocational program for deacons in our diocese, in our jurisdiction. So people do a kind of a remote program, and then they go to the seminary for like a week and do an intensive study. And after a couple of years, they're basically prepared. St. Paul says in 1 Timothy, do not lay hands on anyone hastily, nor share in other people's sins. Keep yourself pure. So there is a vetting process, right? You have to make sure this person's the right place before you have them come in. St. John Chrysostom recommended not ordaining upon a first or a second or a third trial, but after frequent and strict examination and circumspection. And that's a big part of what I think seminary does too. Seminary gives a chance when you go, at least in Orthodox seminaries, a chance to kind of say, is this person crazy, or are they going to be okay? Because it comes out pretty quick. I'll tell you the truth. It comes out pretty quick. It's like a pressure cooker, and if you're not ready for it, you'll drop out, or you'll get through, but you'll say, no thanks, I don't want to do that. So
when Orthodox men go to seminary?
It depends. It might,
Well, they're already married, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Some will go, and women go to seminary too, but for other preparations for other ministries. Not all men go to seminary for priesthood. So seminary is bigger than that. I don't want to think it's only about that. My seminary at the time was focused only on primarily priestly formation. So it was just men, but now it's men and women. They can go when they're young. Some went right out of high school and kind of did their kind of college at the seminary with another college as a partner program. I came after grad school, so I already had an MA before I went to get my MDiv. Some wait until they've had a career in the secular world and they decide to go.
Are there residential programs?
Most of them are, because the amount of material that you have to cover, it's already insufficient to what we do in 3 years. We really need 4 to even get close to, I think, what we need to do. Roman Catholic seminaries, because they require even more academic preparation, tend to be like 7 years.
Well, it depends on what you have coming in.
That's true.
Yeah.
But they want to make sure you have all like the classic philology and all that philosophy and all that.
Because in Catholic seminaries, they have had that issue beginning in like 50s and 60s with basically homosexual infiltration, but it sounds like Orthodox seminaries are not set up in a way where that would be likely to happen.
I would love to say it's not a problem. I would say it's less of a problem, but it's always a problem, because wherever there's men, there's going to be a percentage. So, and that has been an issue in some of our seminaries. So I'm not going to lie to you about that. But I noticed there was a difference, because one of the things I did when I was in seminary is we stayed at a Catholic seminary when the summer, when we were working a job for the chancery, and we were talking with some of the seminarians there, and they said it's like this was in 2000. It was a real problem, major infiltration, and that was surprising, because for us it was more like, there were some people maybe on the down low, but it wasn't quite the rainbow mafia. Let's put it that way. But that is a problem in the world today. Improper ordinations of savage wolves, or those speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples, lead to serious scandals in the loss of faith. And this we've seen over and over again, right? You put somebody in who's got maybe a secret life that they're not telling you about, or something like that, and it can be very bad. I went to one ordination of a guy who, it was a friend, but at his ordination, it was a beautiful church, but it was a brand new church. It hadn't really been used. And the builders, for some reason, had put a fire alarm smoke detector in the altar. What happens in the altar in an Orthodox church? Incense. So in the middle of the point where he's standing before the bishop, as the bishop's giving his homily and about to ordain him, the fire alarm goes off. And unfortunately, the guy who's going to be ordained was the guy who was in charge of that chapel. He's the only one who knew how to turn it off, but he was being so obedient to the bishop that he didn't move. So finally, the bishop stopped what he was saying. He says, "Somebody going to turn that off?" He said, "I'm the only one." Then he ran off. But I think it was a sign from God. Because that guy ended up having some marital issues, marital problems, and then he didn't last very long in the priesthood, sadly. So you have to be, all of this can happen. And I hate to say it, I don't want people to lose their faith, but I don't want them to have a false faith either. Our faith is not in the priests, it's in Jesus Christ. And knowing that even one of Christ's apostles betrayed him, others denied him, and others fled, I mean, should tell you, we don't put our faith in the clerics. And the priests of the Old Testament are the ones, condemning him. So, I mean, it's to be a priest is like, you're a really kind of morally ambiguous figure, honestly, to live in this world today. You are both trying to be an exemplar of virtues, but you're also carrying the weight of the world's suspicions. You are assumed guilty, and of at the very least hypocrisy, of rank hypocrisy, and probably much worse by the people. And especially when all those scandals came out, I would go to the grocery store in my cassock with my little kids, just to be kind of like provocative, I guess, because I knew how people were looking at me like, what's that going on there, because they didn't know Orthodox priests could be married, I guess. But
it must feel good though when someone assumes you're a Roman priest to be able to say, no, I'm an Orthodox priest.
It doesn't feel, doesn't no, because they may not know what it is. So I'm not triumphalist about it. So I don't normally go to the grocery store in my cassock though, anyway.
Do you have a dog collar?
Once in a while I have one. Yeah, but that the whole history of that is weird anyway. So I mean that whole collar thing is because before they all wore cassocks and they had their white shirt showing.
Yeah.
And so once they stopped wearing cassocks, they had to invent something to look like what they used to look like. So yeah, I'm not a fan. So I don't bother with it. And once in a while I wear it.
I have a great joke about
Okay. It's just a little thing now. This is kind of off the core of priesthood, but just so you can see some of the kind of the scriptural connections. A lot of people ask me, why do you have to wear all them fancy clothes? Why don't you, blah, blah, blah. A good set of vestments costs a pretty penny, but I guarantee you it costs less than one of them suits that some of those evangelistic preachers wear. Tailored fine suits. And we can wear ours over and over, right? So in the Old Testament, priesthood had vestments and a whole process. There was a process of consecrating and ordaining priests. So first the vestments were prepared, and then the priests and so forth were prepared and vested and consecrated. Then they had a laying on of hands, presented the ram of ordination. Aaron and his sons lay their hands on the head of the ram of ordination. See, now you're the ram of, when you become a priest, you become the sacrifice in the service. No longer it's the animal on your behalf. That's one of the interesting things. And you're now anointed not with the blood of the ram, but the blood of Christ and the Holy Eucharist. You're anointed with the anointing oil, which we probably heard a little bit about in the Chrismation class. Then you share the sacrificial meal, right? All sacrifice was not just for the sake, you didn't just kill the animal and throw it out, you ate it. It was good meat. And then you served in the altar after that. So then you must not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days until the days of your ordination are complete. In Orthodox tradition, a priest remains in the altar actually for 7 days. Nowadays, it's maybe not followed in that same kind of strictness because people don't normally think of sleeping in the altar, but they might have done that. When I was ordained a deacon, I went and I stayed in the monastery of Holy Mission Monastery in Michigan for the week, and then the week later I was ordained a priest. So I had 7 days of ordination, and I served every day in the altar for those 7 days, which was really beautiful. But in some cases, that's not how it works, obviously. So, but nonetheless, these are patterns and traditions which were kept in Orthodox Christianity. So, for example, the ordination occurs as an integral part of the hierarchical divine liturgy, as I said. Here's the bishop ordaining the priests, bringing him out and saying, here he is, Axios. The vestments are blessed and consecrated. The candidate is vested as a subdeacon or deacon first, and then he's brought into church. Then he will be processed around the corners of the altar. The bishop will lay hands on him. He will be vested at the new rank. So if he was a subdeacon, he would have had just the sticarion, the robe. Now he will be given the Lord have mercy. What is the what?
Cadilla?
No, that's the incense, that's the stole.
Orarian.
The Orarian, yes, thank you, I was forget. I wanted to call it the stole because that's what I wear, but it's Orarian is the
You were shaking
proper
like
term.
that, I was thinking you were incensing something.
Yeah. In peace, let us pray to the Lord. And then immediately that clergy person will serve in the liturgy at whatever point he was ordained. So like when I was ordained, because it was the bishop, I didn't consecrate the holy gifts, but I held the gifts in my hand. Most terrifying, however many minutes it was of my life, was the first time I held the Eucharist in my hands as a priest. And my prayer the whole time was, Lord, please don't let me mess this up. And that's been my prayer pretty much ever since. And I wish I could say I've never messed it up, but God helps me not to mess up as much as I would otherwise. And then again, service is continual in the altar ever after. Father Timothy Haneke, who recently was in the area, gave a nice workshop in the mission in Fairfax. This is pictures of his ordination, so you can see him being brought around. This is now Archbishop Michael, before he had a beard. And that's Metropolitan Tikhon and some of the other clergy and so forth. So he's being brought to the four corners, then he's being vested. He's got the hands being laid on him, and now you can see he's holding the Eucharist and preparing for the rest of the liturgy. And this one, he looks like he actually gets to hold a discos. I didn't even get a discos. I had to hold it in my bare hands. It's scarier. Other vestments you can see very similar. So the reader starts with just a stacarian or a robe. So usually you'll see our readers will come out of the altar wearing the altar boy robe, basically, which is, it's basically the same type of thing. This is what it would look like. This is when the Orarian is crossed for the subdeacon. But you will see in a lot of parishes, especially Byzantine-style parishes like the Greeks, their altar servers will also wear a crossed Orarian. But normally in Slavic practice, you will only see this on a tonsured subdeacon. The deacon has this, but with the large Orarian. And he also wears the cups because he is holding the holy vessels and the holy gifts. So he wears cups, the holy hands, right? That's what they signify. A priest, when he's ordained, he loses the stacarian robe and wears just an alb or a white robe, which is also, I think, called a stacarian. Basically just means a thing you wear. But then the key is that he wears now the Orarian is taken and folded around him. In the ancient church, they literally took the deacon's Orarian and then stitched it together to make this. This is now called a epitrachelion, which is a very fancy Greek word of saying thing around your neck. That's what it literally means. Because trache, right? Tracheotomy. He also wears the phalonion, which is this outer garment, and the belt. Which is also not covered in here, but there's a belt under there somewhere. Well, there's a belt there too. The bishop can wear just the priest's vestments, and then to that is added what's called the Omaforian, which is this thing here over the shoulders, okay? Which is like Christ carrying the lamb over the shoulder, that type of idea. That's the idea. Bishops, again, since the fall of Constantinople, tend to wear the imperial stacarian called the sakos. So they don't wear the phalonion anymore unless they're doing like a kind of low-key liturgy. Bishops who's in a monastery, for example, who's just serving a daily liturgy, may just wear a phalonion and his omophor. He doesn't have to wear the whole fancy sakos. The bishop also wears the various things like the mitre. Actually, these things can be for priests. These are different hats for different levels of priesthood. These are awards as well.
Levels of priesthood.
There are awards for service, like how many years of service. For example, I'm an archpriest, so I was awarded the jeweled cross. So normally I would not wear a jeweled cross until I had so many years.
Oh, this would still serve any problems in the Catholic Church.
Why they don't do that kind of thing?
They don't get any kind of promotion, and so if you want...
They don't do monsignors and red sashes anymore?
Well, they do monsignors, but it's a big issue because the vast majority of your priests, they are priests for life.
Yeah.
If anyone's ambitious and wants to be bishop, they can get ugly. Right? They do monsignor, it's very rare, and then of course, for bishop you have cardinal, but there are so few positions open for bishop that, like, if they could do something like this.
Yeah, it's little things. But even here, I mean, I'm not into it. I don't wear hats. I wear my jeweled cross only on the altar. I don't wear it outside the altar because I'm not gonna. Romanian priests generally don't do that. It's a big thing in the Russian church, and it all goes back supposedly to a story about Catherine, Tsarina Catherine the Great, who supposedly asked for a blessing from a deacon because he was wearing a cassock, and when she found out he was just a deacon, was embarrassed, and so said, from now on, the priest has to wear something to indicate their rank. And so they instituted the ranks of all this nonsense. But it also gets into vanity too. People are like, did you get your cross this or your hat this? And I'm like, I don't give a darn about it. I just want to die in good grace. I don't want to care how I dress. But I have these that were made for me in my first set of vestments, and I don't know what to do with them because I've never been awarded them, and I probably never will. So I was just like, I have them in a drawer somewhere. This is the Engolpion. This is the priest wears a cross. The bishop wears an Engolpion, or a Panagia, which is an icon of the Mother of God, together with his cross. So if you see a cleric with a round thing, that's a bishop. You see a cross only, that's a priest. Deacons normally will not wear a cross, and so forth. Bishops also have a staff. They also have these little rugs. Bishops have these little rugs that they stand on called orlets or eaglets. And that's, again, because they're their overseer, and the eagle watches over the city, that type of thing. So they stand on that to signify this is where the bishop sits or stands during the liturgy. And I think it's primarily just a way to keep people out of the way, because the bishop has to move from place to place. It's like, okay, that's my cue right there, right? So, all right. Vesting prayers are beautiful. This is my favorite priest in the world. This guy was in the Maidan in 2014. If you've ever seen, I just watched an incredible video about this called Winter in Fire or Winter on Fire, about the Maidan in Ukraine, when they ousted the corrupt president there, and what they suffered. And priests of all the different Orthodox and Catholic and so forth churches were all down on the front lines, holding vigil, praying with the people, standing between them and the Berkut military police that were abusing them. And this guy's my hero right here, because he's just like, he's got his shield, but he's got his cross, and he's there to pray. Kick butt through prayer. And you see it's an incredible witness. Some of these guys got beaten up themselves just for trying to keep the peace, protect the flock. But each of the things that the priest puts on, for example, all of them have prayers, scriptural prayers, which we say as we're doing them. Archbishop Nathaniel, when he comes to our parish, likes to, because the bishop actually vests in front of everybody, he likes everyone to kind of see that and hear those prayers. And he says, when you get dressed, you could do the same thing. You're putting on your main piece of clothing, that's your stacarium. Say this, I'm robed with the robe of salvation. If you're wearing a petricule or stole, you put on maybe you're in your falon, you're putting on a coat, or maybe you're putting on gloves, or whatever it is. When you're dressing every day, you could make that a prayerful thing to do. Yeah, you could. I mean, they're just reading scriptures, so why not?
Nuns have the same, and they put on their habits.
Oh yeah, actually, monastic habits are a whole other set of vestments that we could look at. But in any case, there's beautiful prayers for everything. And this is our final slide, which is good. We're right on time, 4:30. Just a little thing for you, a little fun.
I've seen that,
Yeah. Pretty true today, though this could be expanded. But this is the main one here, putting out fires. I like that one. That's pretty good. Kissing boo-boos, filing paperwork, being doctors. Yeah, it's all that and more. I don't even know what this guy's doing. Plowing a field, that's about it. Should put mopping a floor in there too. It's all good.
Will you have a catechism class about preaching?
About preaching itself, no. Because catechumens aren't being taught to preach, so.
Well, no, well, because you didn't mention the preaching faculty.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Not all priests are preachers, right? Because not all priests are and not all parish priests are going to be great preachers. Some are going to be more comfortable doing other things. But preaching is, and as I said last week, confessing itself is not necessarily something every priest has a blessing to do. Even hearing confessions is this kind of a separate blessing that is done for a priest in a parish. So yeah, but that's in Protestant churches, coming up with the 40-minute sermon or something like that, which will be really engaging and exciting, and that you can do from without notes or whatever, is like 50% of their job. For an Orthodox priest, we're lucky if we can get an hour of sermon prep in during the week, and that would be great. I haven't had an hour this week to put in. Man, that's probably my fault, but when you're already doing a lot of other things all week long, it's kind of hard. So yeah. All right. Well, that's it for today. I'll turn off the YouTube.